This was a whale I knew when it was alive, right? You know, you don't get things like this. Usually when a whale skeleton shows up in a museum, it's, you know, it's from a deceased animal. You know?
Right.
So this was a young gray that had been seen in the area in the South Sound and was, you know, not healthy, and we were monitoring it, waiting kind of for it to pass by. There's another one, same story down at Sammy, also tracked that one where the kids got to rebuild it.
Oh,
you
wow,
know, so
that's cool.
So it kind of becomes an educational process, you know.
Right.
That's one of the cool things about a place like this. You know, it's not, when you think of museum, sometimes you think like looking back maybe, especially when you think like a maritime museum. There's a lot of stuff in here that does look back. I mean, it goes back to roots and things, but it's also looking forward because there's so much programming in here that's hands-on, whether it's, you know, reconstructing a whale or building a wooden boat or education, all these touch tanks, you know, where you're getting this firsthand stuff.
From boats like this, whales, and there's the workshop area in the back, what does this facility mean for the community?
Such an interesting hands-on place to get to understand Tacoma's relationship to the Salish Sea. But these buildings were instrumental in the foundation of Tacoma as a city. But this building has ridden through all of the changes, right? And like in the programming that even happens here is not, I mean, some of it goes back to like wooden boat stuff. You go back and kind of build replicas in time, but you're also actively engaged in what is the now and the future of the shoreline here.
Hi, I'm Reed Feder of Tacoma Rising. I'm here with a new friend, Dean Burke, CEO and president of Visit Tacoma-Pierce County, which used to be, what was the name prior?
Travel Tacoma.
Travel Tacoma, that's right.
From travel to visit.
What was the reasoning from that, just out of curiosity? Why did we go from Travel Tacoma to...
The name Travel had been there a long time. Somebody back when that was secured couldn't get the word. It was locked up, and we needed to get rid of it for a long time. We got phone calls every day. People thinking we were a travel agency asking for book tickets for something. And so Visit is the more common lexicon in the industry, and it changes everything. It changes your SEO results for the better, astronomically. Right. So yeah, it was just a matter of finally the one to open, we were able to get it. And we did, so. Good.
Yeah. This is way off topic, but when I first got into co-working, we had I started working for a company called Uber Offices, and every day Uber drivers were coming in with their cell phone and their license and being like, we have a question about this, and we're like, oh boy, we are not wrong Uber. But it matters. I can see, I never thought about Travel Tacoma. They thought that makes sense. So let's just start by talking about, can you explain a little bit about Visit Tacoma-Pierce County?
Yeah. So Visit Tacoma-Pierce County, we're an NGO, non-government agency. We're a DMO, which stands for Destination Marketing Organization. DMOs are all across the country. There's probably 1,600 of them nationwide. They are kind of a sister to a chamber, if you will, a little bit. But our job is to sell the destination, to get people into market. So for us, you know, we joke that if you ask 100 DMOs what they do, you'll get 110 different answers.
Right.
You know, so the nuance is always in the market itself. But we're based in the convention center, first of all, just down the street. We sell the convention center. We actually book that building for the city.
Okay.
So we write all those contracts in there. We carry about, 15 or 20% of the Tacoma Dome inventory as well for some of that stuff. We put things into venues and assets all across the county. We are here to create hotel room nights into the region. We do it by way of three main pillars of business. We do conventions and meetings, we do leisure travel, and we do sports. Not pro sports, so not just that, not pro sports, but your amateur stuff. So We handle the bids and the contracts for local things like the WIA state championships, or otherwise. We've had national championships here of all different varieties and stuff. That stuff comes through our office. So 3 main pillars of business. A lot of what we do is group business. So a lot of big bookings where we have a defined audience of people coming in, staying for, one night, many nights. It just depends. And through all those different mediums and channels. And we're countywide. We serve the whole footprint from the water through Mount Rainier and from Fife to DuPont. So it's a big landscape, really diverse, and lucky to get to do it. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds like it's there's a lot going on. What does a day-to-day look like for you? Is one day incredibly different from the next?
It's running with scissors all the time.
Yeah.
It's just, and it does changes all the time, changes every season. It changes every other year with things like government contract cycles and budget cycles. So, literally just things like the every other year budget cycles change, the tempo of the year, there's no status quo. Some weeks and days and months are just off the rails, and sometimes you get a little calm, and it's never the same twice. And it's exciting because it's not routine.
There's, I've read something about being an entrepreneur that one of the routine is an enemy.
Yes.
And with you, we talked about this off camera. You feel that you're very entrepreneurial. Your mindset works entrepreneurially, and I think we're going to talk about several of those things. Do you feel that helps you? That mindset helps you with your day-to-day role?
Completely. I mean, it's how I got the job. First of all, I did not come from this background. I came from a very private sector minded, entrepreneurial minded applications and practice in life. And so this organization, I came in, 30 years after they were created, but was yearning for that, looking for that kind of mindset, that kind of practicality to get things done. And so that's what we've done.
It's interesting because I've heard your name for a while. I've heard, your name comes up all the time, but we hadn't met, and we met through planning a Tacoma Rising event around the 7048, which I had no idea that you were involved with. And when Jody from the Seaport Museum, she reached out, or when we talked, she was like, "You've got to talk to Dean." I go, "Okay, let's do that. I've been wanting to meet Dean." What is the 7048, and how did that get? Where was the inspiration behind that?
The 7048 is a human-powered paddling race that goes from Tacoma to Port Townsend, Washington. It's a distance of 70 miles, and you have 48 hours to complete it. Thus the name, 7048. The winners will complete it in about 10 hours, and then some people won't complete it, and then others will go all the way to the past the 45-hour mark, depending on the situation. So the idea behind it was actually many years beforehand, inspired through a mountain biking event. Actually, I see a lot of events. I've worked in events in all my life in sports, and I've been around the world. I've worked in Olympics and X Games and the Berlin Marathon, and I mean I've been everywhere. I've a depth of experience there, and I joke that I've become completely jaded, and I'm a cynical jerk about events because they all bore me to death, and it's hard to see anything original and exciting anymore. I own that. I admit it. It's just how it is. You spend enough time in something, and so I had been inspired by a bike race called the Tour Divide, which is a race that goes from Banff, Canada to Indian Wells, I think, and at the U.S.-Mexico border. Antelope Wells? Suddenly I've forgotten the name. Anyway, it follows the Continental Divide from north to south, and it's largely off-road. It's unsupported, and it's difficult. You get a tracker, a GPS tracker, and you have to phone in every so often and check in with home base. I thought the idea was amazing. I fell in love with the weirdness of the event, the people it attracted, and I had long wanted to replicate something like that, but what I called it a working man's scale. The idea of a race like that for guys like me, it was a little untouchable because for a lot of people, it takes a month of their life, or it takes a few weeks to complete, and just the lifestyle you have to be able to take on projects like that is unique, right?
Right.
You have to kind of have weird seasonal work, and you have to have a relationship that'll support it, and a family, and all these. So I had started from there, and I thought, well, I wonder if I could do a race like this that went across Washington. It's something working man's class, something that maybe took 3, 4, 5 days, still super hard, still super epic, life-changing opportunities, but you could still get back to work and not have to take a mortgage out of your house to do this kind of thing. And I sat with that for a long time. And then at the same time, I was paddling and going all over the place and enjoying that as well. And a race showed up on the radar in 2015 out of Port Townsend called the Race to Alaska. And largely targeted at boats, like sailboats and stuff, but also was attracting some interesting human power contingents as well. And when I looked at that race, and I read about it, I went, oh, this is the Tour Divide at sea. This is exactly the Tour Divide at sea. In fact, it was so close to it, I actually wondered if it was some of the same people working on it. And so I reached out to the guys up in Port Townsend, and I went and met them, and I was like, oh, okay, and I just fell in love with these guys. These are my people. This is fun and weird and unique, and the Race to Alaska was beautiful and attractive and all these things. Same set of problems as Tour Divide. I was like, it's not going to be for me. How can this work? And I said, what if we did a version of this that was a little bit smaller in scale and was just a human powered thing? What if we went from Tacoma to Port Townsend? And I'd been telling him, I was like, me and some of my buddies were talking about paddling into Race to Alaska from Tacoma, kind of crashing the party or something, just joking around. Anyway, we all hit it off. The ideas started spinning, and it happened to be in a space that kind of, it blurred lines between what I was into personally and unique event creation and these things, and work and the destination and all this stuff, and same with them. And we put our heads together and created this thing, and there it was, it was a rare example of taking some risk on an idea that we didn't know if it would work, because there's not a lot of there's almost no peer sample like it anywhere. There's some other long paddle races and things like that does happen in places like rivers and things like this, but we really hadn't seen anything like this at all. And in that first year, which was 2018, the first year we launched, behind the curtain, we just said, if we just get 30 teams, we'll be happy. And a team could be an individual, or it could be a canoe full of people. It doesn't matter. Team is just a craft, regardless how many people are. If we just get 30 teams, it'll work. And we got 130. So we're like, oh, okay. And it's pretty much been, at that and growing since. So it worked. It struck a nerve. We found a place where people wanted to have that kind of expression, something big, but not so big, but certainly big enough to change their life. And that's another part of the story.
What was the biggest surprise that you've gotten from the 7048? And maybe it is the 130, teams that showed up the first year, but is there something that has really surprised you about how the event has evolved?
Absolutely. And, the amount of people that showed up that first year was just the first surprise, right?
Yeah.
It was really just this giant confirmation that this does matter and it's going to work. The real surprise came later. And this was where none of us could have ever predicted this, would have ever imagined it. And I was just talking, I just had lunch a week ago with the guy who was at the center of this next piece. So, and I apologize, I'm forgetting the year this happened. Maybe it was 19, maybe it was 20, maybe it was 19, I think. Anyway, we get an inquiry from a team that wants to enter the race. And by the way, to get into the race, you have to apply to look at qualifications, right. And then you get vetted. And if they think you look good, then you get accepted. Then you get into the race. You can't just show up. Yeah,
that's a pretty significant race. Just to hey,
yeah,
let's do this. I heard this is happening this weekend.
Yeah, and you know, there part of it goes through the night and stuff like that, and you get across some fairy lanes and things like this. So making sure everybody knows what they're doing is important. So we get this inquiry and this kind of tap that says, hey, we're interested in doing this. The team was from Bailey, Colorado, right smack in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, and not a place known for, you know, paddling and maritime or anything, right? So, and it was from a program, from a STEM program at Platte Canyon High School.
Okay.
And if you Google Platte Canyon High School, you will get horrible, sad, tragic results. You will see a school in a town that was marred by a tragedy at that school close to 20, probably 20 years ago now, I think. And, you know, a situation where a man came into the school and took hostages, and a life was lost, and others were changed horribly forever. And he killed himself before they could get to him. And Bailey's a town of like 8,000 people, really small place. And this event scarred the town forever. You know, no one was not affected by this. This school was K through 12 in one building.
Oh, wow.
You know, and they didn't ask for this. This was, nobody ever does. And it affected this town in a way that, you know, as these kids grew, any kid in school age, you know, maybe they went to something with their parents, maybe they were down in Denver or something at an event. And, you know, what happens? Somebody says, oh, hi, how are you doing? Where do you go to school? You know, and the kid goes, oh, I go to Platte Canyon. And what do? They go, oh, you know, that's the response, you know, and it stuck, you know, it stayed that way for way too long. So this guy who was a STEM teacher there, brilliant guy, lots of great ideas, said, hey, I got this idea. What if we built a boat and we went to Tacoma and we paddled this race? And so he pitched it into the community, and it worked. And they created this funny club. They called it the Platte Canyon Yacht Club, and they built this Frankenstein boat that was this hodgepodge of design ideas that came together, and they put, I don't know, like 19 people in it or something like this. Wow. Teachers and students, and the kids built it by hand. They built it in school, and they were coming after hours and on the weekends, and they were just fully invested. None of these kids had ever even seen saltwater. They'd never been to the Atlantic or the Pacific, and they trailered this thing across the country, and you know, they did a bunch of practices out in the lakes and the mountains, and they took it down to Dana Point, California, and they brought it up here, and then they did this race, and along the way, they rewrote their identity. You know, like now when people in other towns would have that moment where they say, oh, where do you go to school? You know, and they say Platte Canyon, they'd be like, oh, you guys, we read about you. You know, that story that year, that first year they did it, we got picked up by like 300 news outlets coast to coast. Yeah. You know, and they suddenly their identity was this like visionary idea, transformational thing, and it changed everything, right? And who could have imagined that happening, right? Like the idea that, you know, we had a pretty you know, right size idea what we thought this race would look like over this, you know, and most of that was true. You know, we kind of had an idea of, you know, the skill sets and where people would come from, and it's been fascinating. But that you couldn't have guessed. But it didn't stop there, because they went on to do the race, I think 3 times now.
Same boat or different boat?
Mostly the same boat. It modified, It did evolve a little bit. It went from a tri-hull to a 2-hull and things like this. But their story inspired another school, also in the mountains, and it was in the high desert mountains in Utah, and they one-upped them. It wasn't just another school; it was a school for the Utah School for the Blind and Deaf. So now we got, you know, this boat full of kids that are blind and deaf, you know, and they're going to do this thing. And they built a boat, and they came in and did it, and I think they've done it 3 times, and it's just like, oh my gosh, and to sit, I've talked with every one of these kids in these boats, and to sit, talk with them at the start, talk with them at the finish, and see where they are, see what they think, see how they change is phenomenal, And they're going to talk about this their whole life.
Yeah.
They're going to carry this with them forever. And, one year for the race had a couple of humpback whales in the course in the night. And the, one of the girls who was blind was telling me about her interaction of hearing and experiencing a humpback whale under in the night. Of course she can't see; it's always dark to her, but she could hear it in ways that we can't. And she didn't know what it was. And just like that transformational experience. And I just remember going, my gosh, we joked internally, within the race, like we're passengers to this thing now.
Yeah,
this has changed, and there are so many stories. I think we've had, I don't know, over 700 people now do the course. And I wish I could hear every one of the stories because every time I talk to somebody, I could spend hours talking to them because their story is so incredible. We had a guy that donated a kidney one year right before the race, to a friend of his.
Oh, wow.
A very, very urgent situation, and then he, went all kinds of stuff like that, and it just keeps going. And then the story of the race course itself, this thing starts on the Foss Waterway and it ends at the Northwest Maritime Center in Port Townsend. Both locations were EPA Superfund sites. These were not places where you would normally think about mixing humans and water,
Yeah.
I mean, these were highly contaminated sites that, the federal government came in on and said, we're going to overwatch the cleanup on this. And then you go through that transformation. And just as we couldn't have expected these types of stories to come out of the race itself, I don't think these campuses, these waterways, these sites could have imagined that these kinds of stories would come of the results, the cleanup.
Right.
And so there's a lot to those stories. There's a lot of power to that, to those ideas, and that, you can see so far into something, but give it room, and it may go a lot further than you can imagine. Those
are great examples of just sharing ideas and working ideas and getting people together and doing something that might sound outrageous at first, but it can grow into something magnificent. Those are all I knew about the School of the Blind, but those are incredible stories. And I hope we hear more of those as time comes. One thing that I was a little bummed to hear about, and I'll ask you a question before I tell you that. What's something that you would like to see change of the race? Like what's something that you think could change that would be a positive, or is there anything that you could see change?
I think we're just getting ready to sit down probably this fall and really ask that question. We've been kind of running it, kind of hanging on to it since the start. And it was really difficult, of course, starting the race in 2018 and then, rolling up into a pandemic when we did, and then coming out of the pandemic and how the race performed and then we moved the start line, what would be two races ago now, this year's and last year's, to the Seaport Museum.
Yeah.
So there was that transition as well, and getting our legs under us for that and seeing what that looks like and how that serves the race, and then just trying to think ahead to what's next. Does the race itself need any tweaks? But outside of anything that happens on the water per se, I'm interested in seeing how we can bring the community to the race more. Everybody in Tacoma and in the area who has an event that's the first ambition for everybody. How to get more people involved. And every event has this problem. We see these repeated over and over and over in all the festivals and all the events around the area. Largely, there's only so much audience. There's only there's a lot of events on top of each other. A lot of things. A lot of weekends have multiple events at the same time. So it's difficult. It's there's some foundational challenges to that just in the area itself, just in the diversity of the area, the diversity of the landscape, the diversity of the social cultures, the interest sectors across the board. all these things roll up and inform how people show up and celebrate these different events and stuff. Naturally, I have a bias on this one. It's a personal one for me. I love this event. It's the sea is my place. It's where my passions and my overtime goes a lot too, and so I'm interested in continuing to share what these shorelines and what this Salish Sea can do in people's lives. And that's been a passion of mine for a long time. I have been here in Tacoma long enough to, I was here before the big cleanups happened. I was here when this water was very uninviting, when it was very messy. I watched it go through the transformations, and they actually worked. Yeah. I watched the cleanup. I watched sea life come back to places that it hadn't been in a long time. I watched pier pilings and sea floors that were devoid of life come back to life. I've documented a lot of it, kind of accidentally at first, really, and then celebrated that. And I've watched this city's identity with its shoreline change radically in the last 15 years. I've watched it go from almost no one being in the water to, you go down Owen Beach right now on a Saturday, thank a pandemic and cold plunging, you'll see, over the course of 4 or 5 hours, you'll see 400 or 500 people go through the water for a cold plunge. In 2017, you'd see 3 people. I know I was there. It was very few. And so now to see so much, you'll see. We went from one place on the whole shoreline that you could rent a kayak to 5. Things like this. This is where people want to test the waters, so to speak, and cross that threshold. And it's really changed dramatically. We've got paddle clubs that are based on the Foss Waterway now, as activations and programming happening, and rowing and Hawaiian outriggers and the dragon boat clubs and all these things. So these are huge changes, and they're big. They're not just recreational changes; they're social changes in how a city's identity resonates against that shoreline. And it's been a fascinating journey to watch. And I probably just went down some huge rabbit hole you didn't ask about.
No, and the reason you answered the question I was looking for, because one thing that I would love to see change, more attendance from Tacomans. And I think we had talked about that and before the race, because we wanted to do an event with the Chippewa and just to, try to show more support. And I just so happened to be talking to a few other businesses that are in Point Ruston and along the Schuster Waterway, or is that right?
Ruston.
Ruston Water. I'm sorry. Lobster Shop and some of the groups that we've worked with, and mentioned that, hey, listen, in June there is this race that it starts at 7. I think it was 7, and goes from 7 to 9 o'clock. You're going to see people paddling past here, and this is a great watch party opportunity. And getting businesses and other folks to participate in that in some level is something that we are going to, like, every year we're going to do it. We're going to do the Chippewa. We're going to get involved at some level and try to help promote whatever we can do to help. We don't have a huge audience yet, but no, I think getting more businesses and organizations working together when they do events and stuff like this, and I think this is critical for Tacoma. It's a perfect event for Tacoma to showcase who Tacoma is and what we do here. Yeah. And the stories behind it are fascinating and just inspiring. So that's why I asked the question. I was wondering if that's still running parallel with some of the concerns, just getting people there. Let's get Tacoma out to these events, and I think that would be really, really helpful. Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to see a youth team from Tacoma. That would be cool. We've seen high schools from other cities build crafts for this and participate. I think there's been a teacher or a couple of teachers who had a craft that some students worked on, but I want to see the students. I think that would be cool. And so okay, more Tacoma. So Dean, photography. You're very passionate about that. I learned this recently, that you do a lot of underwater photography, which I was blown away with the images that I saw. How did it start underwater for you? Like, how did your photography submerge? Like, what got you under the water? It was an accident, to be honest. I mean, it all started it started just, I don't know, 12, 14 years ago, maybe, when just paddling. And it was me just
taking pictures of what I was seeing paddling, and showing it to my friends and family, because I was seeing a lot of amazing things, and I've had, tremendous encounters on the water, a lot of whales and a lot of exciting moments. And so I was just documenting it. And then I started, back then I started poking GoPro cameras and stuff underwater, taking pictures of the sea life that I was finding on the pier pilings along the Foss and along the Ruston shoreline. And I mentioned this earlier, that there was a point, all of that was an undersea desert for decades. Nothing grew there, right? Barnacles didn't grow on pier pilings. They didn't grow on boats. The seafloor was just blank. And that was all from Asarco, from the smelter and the contamination and stuff. And so that was a big deal. And there was nothing there. And I, as I was paddling and stuff, I started literally each year I started seeing, it was like, oh, there's, these things are showing up in the pier pilings. And I started taking photos of them just so I could see them, and I'd just paddle up to something and I'd put my arm underwater and I'd take a photo and I'd go back and go, oh, interesting. And then somebody at the University of Washington saw them and said, hey, we're interested in those. And then they sent their marine department down, and they're like, oh my gosh, these things are coming back to life, right? And we started to see this change, and I started giving them the catalogs of photos, and it started to go from there. And so we that just began by documenting change, and again, completely accidentally. Some friends of mine who were open water swimmers, my friend Melissa, and who's probably the first swimmer I ever took photos of up till now, who said, hey, you should come take some pictures of us swimming sometime. And so, they swim without wetsuits, and it's cold water. And so I started doing that. And then that was the next step, and people were like, what the heck? People are going in the water, without wetsuits. Again, this is way before people were cold plunging and all this stuff. And so people were surprised to see this, and it started this curiosity, and that started attracting other people who started coming into the water. And then there was the big kind of zenith moment with cold plunge. People started going in, and that put a few more people farther out in the water as well, other swimmers, and it kind of grew. And with it, I was growing with it, and what I was able to capture and my interest in it, and then just starting to swim more with it and free dive around it, and then the most recent stuff in the last few years, couple of years, I guess now, 2.5, something like that, 2 to 3 years. My collaborator, artistic partner in this, her name's Jillian Nettles. She also had gotten kind of into the swimming side of it, having seen some of the earlier photos, and then we started working together. She's an artist, a professional artist. She teaches art at Annie Wright, and we put our heads together and said, why don't we try to elevate this and create some more art around this? And so we go into the water together, and we swim in and shoot this stuff, and at the same time, not only are we creating art in an unusual way, but we're getting to celebrate these waters that you would not have done this in not that long ago,
right?
And the idea that we can do that and capture that kind of beauty in a wild place, cold waters, and in a dynamic, exciting setting, and that it's clean enough to do it is a cool story.
What's the most challenging part of capturing these underwater shots?
There's so many parts to it, because they are in the wild, they are in open water. Excuse me. We don't use any artificial lights. So we got to have good light, got to have overhead lights. So one time in photography, you want the sun right overhead. We got to have water clarity. We don't shoot in the summer. Water gets pretty speckly. So winter, so it's cold, even colder. We'll shoot when it's 48 degree water, and we've air temps as low as low 20s. And so that's a challenge. We've only got about 17 to 20 minutes to be in the water before it's too cold. So, in the water, she's moving, I'm moving, and all the water's moving. So, working with all these pieces together at once is always challenging. And certainly as we've incorporated elements like fabrics and dresses and things like this, all of that stuff becomes both sails and anchors underwater. And so you got to be careful, and we get stung by jellyfish and gotta watch out for boats and whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
There's always something, you know.
Is every shot a perfect shot?
No. But we try to come out of every shoot session with half a dozen good shots, you know. And for the most part we do. You know, I think we generally, you know, get 6 to 10 pretty good shots, you know, each time. For every 20 minutes we're in there.
How many shots are you taking in?
It depends. It depends on how good the conditions are and just how lucky we're getting. You know, we kind of have this communication between each other that we've done enough of it now, and how we time the shoot and what we're trying to achieve and the positions. We talk through it on land before we go in, and then how we communicate in the water. You know, every time it's a breath hold, we count together, we go under together. We're trying to, you know, achieve these things. You're always popping up because you're full of air,
right?
You know, and so there's a lot of you know, moments and just practice and you know, the time we've been doing it's just helped us achieve a level at it that's we're able to produce with consistency.
How has the photography changed your views of the Puget Sound's ecosystem once you started getting under the water and started doing all the photography?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you know, it was watching the ecosystem change. It was literally me observing it that informed it, right? It was like, I'm going to take pictures of this because I'm seeing things. I'm seeing enough change in real time here that I think I should document this, you know, and so that just continues, right? And you know, and it's always interesting going to different parts. Sometimes we'll travel around and look at different parts of the area to look for different conditions and clarity and interesting features or something. And you know, you're always looking at what's happening there as a result. How is that informed by, you know, all this urban density that surrounds these shorelines? You know, there's always a tension with that, right?
Yeah.
You can't have this many people living on a shoreline without having impacts, and that's just that. You know, that's always going to be the case. But how do you live in enough balance with that so that you're not? We've seen what it looks like when you just go hog wild and you just destroy it. That's very possible, and it's possible to fix it, you know, or bring it back considerably. You know, I mean, there's still some problems. You know, we still got some EPA sites out here that won't go away. You know, but by and large, with a lot of hard work, a lot of money, and a lot of care, you know, changes can happen, and everybody can benefit from it.
Would it be safe to say that your early curiosity turned into turned into art, a form of art?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, early curiosity and an evolving stage, you know, like a place that, like, again, you wouldn't have done this before, you know? So it's hard to imagine walking up to a place that you wouldn't have done it before and say, oh, should we create beautiful art here? You just don't think like that.
No.
At first, you know, we're all kind of passengers to that environment and those conditions. So as it evolved, and it was like, you know what, this is a stunning place, and maybe we can create something unique here that tells a different angle of this. So, and at all points, I think all of these, the common denominator of my interest and activities on these waters point to human experience, changed lives, changed outcomes. You know, when people step across that threshold from land to sea, you know, from there, go. You know, you're going to change. Something is going to happen. You know, you're going to have an experience, and you're going to find something new in yourself, and you're going to find a new relationship in this environment that you may not have known before. And, you know, you can just go, you can go half mile or a mile out there, and there's no one, you know, and we seek a lot of that, I think, you know, as we go outdoors, you know, if we're going out in the woods or whatever the case may be. But, you know, you can get to that right here off the shore and have some pretty incredible experiences.
I think what you've captured on film or on with a camera, it gives a whole different vantage point of what the Puget Sound is or can be, or what I mean, like the ones that the few that I've seen, which I'm going to dig into more because I was blown away with what the creativity that you guys were doing to do the shoots. I think it's really interesting to see a different perspective of the Puget Sound from underwater and how beautiful it really is. And I think we take those things for granted. I mean, I'm from Indiana.
Yeah.
We didn't have the Puget Sound.
Right.
Every day when I wake up, I've got mountains. I've got just green mountains, usually. The water, it's this vast environment that it's incredible. And I think it's easy to look past that or get used to that and take it for granted if you're from here and you've had it. But when you're from Indiana, the cornfields of Indiana, you wake up and you're like, holy cow, my son gets to grow up in a place like this. And I think the way that you guys have captured it is incredible. It just gives a whole nother side of what's under that water.
I'm not from here either. I've lived here for 30 years. I just turned 30 in July. And turned 30 years living here.
Yeah.
I'm 30 years old.
I was going to say, man,
No, I'm not 30 years old. 30 years living here. But I know what that means because to not take it for granted because where I'm from was vastly different than this and a very different story from A to Z. And we didn't have this kind of environment. I was 4 years old when I knew I was going to live here. Mm-hmm. I had a family friend who was a photographer, had a bunch of beautiful photos of Washington State and Oregon. And I was 4 years old and I saw them and I went, that's where I'm going to, I just as sure as some kid may say, I'm going to be an astronaut. I was like, I'm going to live in Washington.
Yeah.
And as soon as I got, old enough and had enough horsepower under me to do it, I did. And this place means everything, mm-hmm. It's so incredible how much is packed into such a small space here. I mean, Washington State has like the 4 major ecosystems in one state. We're the only state that has that.
Yes.
Saltwater, coastal ocean shoreline, rainforest, glacial mountains, and desert.
Yeah.
And you can get to 3 of those in any other place, and then we've got a livable urban density as well.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to be off the grid to get to this. So the amount of access we have in such a short amount of space, from the summit of, if you stood on the very tip top of Mount Rainier and just drew a straight line to the Foss Waterway, it's 42 miles. So from zero elevation, saltwater, to 14,410 feet, glacial volcano, 42 miles. The amount of geologic diversity that happens down that slope all the way down, and the amount of like cultural diversity that happens along with it, and in this like one county, we have like people that we have 4th generation logging industry, mountain people. We have 4th generation maritime fishermen and shipping and longshoremen. We have 2-star generals. Mm-hmm. we have like the most amazing buffet of lifestyles and cultures and jobs and identities that go with it here. It's so it is not lost on me either. And I almost think you'll hear this in places like this. Sometimes it's the people that come from out of town that maybe work the hardest for it sometimes because, we're not cynical about it. I mean, I hate it when I hear people in any town say something negative about their community. Yeah. When they say something like, keep it classy, whatever, and they name a town, I'm like, let's not do that. It doesn't help us,
There's like, I know it's meant to be funny, but there's things that like, Tacoma Rising, the whole brand is around a new message mm-hmm. around Tacoma, and that it's been labeled so many things, and people like to poke fun of like Tacoma and the history and whatnot, and it's a little frustrating because I think it's such an underrated city and community that it's incredible. Like Tacoma, I love Tacoma.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I get, everyone's got there's jokes and things like that, but like we posted, Chris Dottinger was on the podcast, and he had a short clip where he said something about Tacoma. It's the dark spot on the horizon. Don't go to Tacoma, is what he was told. But he got here because he went to PLU, and he goes, holy shit, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's within 12 seconds, this little clip that we posted. And I think it was on TikTok that it got over 50,000 views and so many. It was one of our biggest, most successful watched and liked posts that we've had. And if you go back and look at all of the comments, it's people that hate Tacoma, that wish they didn't live here, or and then there's people that love Tacoma, and it's just like, I wish that we saw more people supporting how awesome Tacoma is, but there's a lot of negative things around it, and I guess it's perspective.
Yeah.
It's you looking.
I mean, that stuff's a byproduct of social media.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
I have definitely learned that any town you go to, if you posted that same thing for said town, you would get the same results.
Oh yeah. Especially on TikTok.
Yeah.
TikTok
it's just
the worst.
Just
but
built to breed that stuff. I don't even look at it, but
but that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just because I don't have time. Who has time to look at Jerry Springer? I don't.
Oh no.
It's terrible.
Sure.
But I mean, that's where things like this come together. It's just like, I am here to be supportive of this, I would no sooner insult you, than I would where I live. I live here,
yes.
I'm not going to, shit in my own bed,
and that's,
I gotta make it
I
nice,
agree. It's, and I guess and again, I look at it and I kind of laugh anymore. Cause I mean, okay, but it's just like, it's the mindset that when it's like there's a lot that just take things for granted. And then there are the people that are out doing what you do and that are swimming in very cold waters, taking some incredible photos and just enjoying where you live. And Chris doing all of the pretty gritty tours, and it's incredible to watch. Everyone has their passion that they're doing something. And this season, we're talking to entrepreneurs and influencers and people that are really passionate about what they're doing. And I love hearing their stories because they're all different and they're all doing different things, but they all love Tacoma. And that's just, it's inspiring. And one of the pieces that come with that, I ask the same question. It's my last question that I always ask. And it's, if you could give some advice to a young person that's getting ready to start their career, or they're getting ready to graduate high school or college, but they're getting ready to go out into the workforce, what advice would you give them as they're moving forward?
This is advice I even give my sons, right? I mean, it's just the thing I look for and I yearn for to see in youth like that is find that thing that wakes you up and go there, right? There are so many ways to make a living in the world today. Way more than, probably our parents thought or taught us, right? I mean, that's just true. And whether you go to college or whether you go to trade school or whether you just jump into the workforce, whatever you're going to do, you have to go all. Yeah. Okay. So one of those is not less work than the other. And so, if college isn't for you, well, buckle up. You're going to have to go just as hard to get the experience you need to equal that. If college is for you, well, that's no easy ride either. You gotta go for it. So, but if it wakes you up, if it drives you, as long as it's, right. Then go there and you will, you will find your way, and then I say this, some of my early mentors were always kind of joke. They were like, don't ruin a good hobby, it doesn't mean you have to just be, driven to whatever trend of the moment you think is, but, find something meaningful and go there. But, be hungry, be curious, find out what that is, and the world is yours. Get after it.
I think that's very well said. And thank you for that. And thank you for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. I learned so much about you, and it was interesting. I mentioned when I was writing the questions up today, or not today, for today, I went back and had to change questions because I was like, oh my gosh, he does this too. And I think it's really interesting. And the more I get to know you, it's just, it's really cool, all the things that you're doing. And I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.